Hey, I'm Cedric Chambers, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of the 3D Podcast, a masterclass where we share with you everything you need to know about how to transform diversity and inclusion in your organization as well as in your community. We're on a mission to amplify the voices of leaders that are making an impact in the world today so that we can have a better tomorrow. Our goal every episode is to keep it simple, honest, and transparent with you by uncovering the truths in diversity and inclusion with the hope of creating behavioral change, all while presenting it from a unique perspective. So look, if you're ready, get your notepad out, pour you a drink, and let's dive deep as we discuss the dimensions of diversity. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 3D Podcast, where we speak to real practitioners that are making real change in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. I'm excited for the show today as we are speaking to Adrienne Lucas. Adrienne is the diversity and inclusion strategist for the National Association of Minority Speakers. In addition to her work at NAMES, Adrienne is the global director of diversity and inclusion for a marketing and advertising nonprofit. Over the years, Adrienne has worked on diversity initiatives for many major companies. Some of those include Amazon Design, Google Creative Lab, Estee Lauder, Lockheed Martin, and WPP. She received her Juris Doctorate from NYU Law and is passionate about the intersection of law, social justice, and civil rights. Her aim is to have every workshop and conversation that she facilitates lead to better understanding and open-mindedness among the participants. Look, so without further ado, I hope you're excited because I know I am. Let's jump into this discussion with Adrienne Lucas. So how you doing today, Adrienne?
I'm doing all right. It's beautiful outside and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, look, I'm excited for the discussion today. Really looking to dig into this information. But before we start the conversation, what I would like for you to do is, could you provide just a little bit of your background, kind of your career journey up until this point? How did you get into the D&I space, just so that our audience can get a better understanding of who you are?
Yeah. So I was raised in Queens, New York, which is definitely one of the most ethnically diverse areas in the country. And growing up, I went to bar mitzvahs, quinceañeras, and I had friends of every color, and that was normal to me. In
Yep.
addition to that, I am a first generation American. So both of my parents were born and raised in Sierra Leone, West Africa, and they immigrated to
Nice.
the country for college. So in addition to the richness of my experience growing up in Queens, I was also influenced by West African culture. That's just to provide some context. So
Mm-hmm.
here I am, this Sierra Leonean American kid from Queens, and I'm deciding where to go to college. I received a full academic scholarship to attend the University of Pittsburgh, and I was really excited about graduating from college debt free, goals,
Yep.
right? What I didn't think about was the culture shock that I would experience.
Mm.
Pittsburgh is located in Western Pennsylvania, and it borders Ohio and West Virginia. So it pretty much has a Midwestern feel. And that was
Mm-hmm.
a really big departure from my life in the big city. And in fact, a lot of my friends from Queens thought Pittsburgh was near Philly. It's not. It's like
And
5
Pennsylvania is a big state.
Yes. And so, as background, Pittsburgh is a majority white city, and it does have pockets of Black people, but an even smaller number of Asian and Hispanic populations. And that was definitely reflected in the demographics of the university I went to. So, there were classes where I was the only Black student, and I felt a burden to be the ambassador for my race. And I became really interested in the nexus between diversity and higher education. And the more research that I did in this space, the more I realized how helpful it is to be able to talk the talk, read legislation, and understand the systems of power. So for me, that meant going to law school, although I will say that is not the only path to doing that. That's just the one that I chose. So after graduating from NYU Law, I started working in higher education, and I had an amazing opportunity to teach a course on cultural immersion to college students. And that just kind of kicked everything off for me. I spent the next few years helping educational institutions, nonprofits, and a law firm develop their diversity talent pipelines, which I know we're going to talk about today, create inclusive work environments, and drive initiatives to help with employee retention and engagement. And that also sparked my interest in consulting work. So
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that gives you some background.
No, it does. It does. It does. So let me ask you this. I mean, you have a rich background. As you've kind of navigated through your life and your career, like what are some of those like some of the biggest learnings that you've kind of just acquired along the way that's really helped you in your career?
I think it's really helpful to talk to as many people as possible and to learn from as many people as possible outside of your circle. I say that because I grew up in a house, right? And I had two immigrant parents. And based off of my world, that meant that we were middle class, right? I thought we grew up comfortable because I grew up in a home, right? It had stairs in it. I had my own room. And then I went to law school and I took this course, and it was literally called Class and the Law. So I guess I should have expected this. And then the first day of class, the professor asked us, like, how many of you grew up middle class? How many of you grew up wealthy? And I raised my hand when she said middle class. And when my peers started describing their middle class experience, I was like, oh, just kidding.
Mm-mm.
I was not middle class. Like, I think it's just so important to talk to people and learn, because that will open your eyes. And sometimes that will maybe help you reassess where you think you are in society, but also just being more in tune with the world. So that's the example that I have for that.
No, awesome, awesome. I love that. Look, he's like, oh, that's middle class. Y'all get your own bedroom, and you don't have to share a Happy Meal. Get out of here. Get out of here. Oh no, that's great. That's great. And so, as we're talking about diversity recruitment, inclusive hiring, this is one of my just favorite places to be when it comes to discussions and conversations. And look, I want to just jump right into it. And so, when you think about this topic, like, what do you see as fundamental issues as it relates to diversity recruitment when it comes to companies and why they can't seem to grapple or solve this problem at their organization?
Yeah, I think it's because there is an underlying assumption that some executive leaders and recruiters have that diverse talent isn't as good, right? Or isn't as
Mm,
smart. And that
hmm
there's some settling that that company has to do in order to increase the number of diverse employees. And they need to get that out of their heads. Diverse
mm,
talent brings a different cultural background, experience, and insight that makes us hella valuable, right? And we will only continue to get more valuable over time because we all know society is changing. Consumer bases are changing, and the census projects that the US will become minority white in 2045. So if a company keeps looking at hiring and policies from a strictly white lens, they will fall behind in the future. I will say that that is the biggest problem we have.
So you made a statement, and I want to unpack this really quick. So when you said that individuals or companies are thinking that diverse talent, they aren't as smart, right? Where does that come from?
I mean, how much do you want to unpack it?
We can go. I got some time. I got time today.
I mean, this is literally rooted in culture, right? I
hmm
mean, ooh, uh, there's a lot. I mean, first of all, when you ask people in America, like I've facilitated a conversation for a company before, and I was like, what is the first thing you think of when you think of African, history or Black history? And they talk about
hmm
slavery, right? If that is your first understanding or perception of a people, right?
No.
Versus taking that understanding back to their origins in Africa, where people were kings and queens and had whole
Mm,
kingdoms, right? I'm thinking of, know, these expansive empires, then it will trickle down into your perception of these
hmm
people, right? And so I think the problem is that our history in this country has been riddled with us constantly fighting for equality, right? Us constantly fighting for a seat at the table, that maybe there are some people that wonder, like, is there a reason why they don't have a seat
mm.
at the table? Right? And so it goes that deep. And I think a lot of the work that we're doing now is changing that narrative and
Yep.
helping people see us for who we are, because we've always been who we were, but it's about
Yeah.
other people seeing us for who we are, right? And I
Mm.
think that this is happening now more than ever, but there's just so much things that happen historically that have colored people's lens, and made them have this perception of us.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. I mean, when you talked about the slavery piece, that kind of hit me because it's one of those things to where you hear today, right, that, hey, there's been so much progress that's been made in the Black community, right? Things are better than they were. And then it immediately comes to my mind, and I'm saying, so to say that things are better than they are, please tell me the starting point in which we're talking about. Because if you start our existence as like, hey, Black people popped up as slaves, then you're thinking that's the beginning up until now, then you make a look at that. But until you, like you said, unpack what happened before slavery, knowing that we didn't start there, there's so much rich in the history, so much rich in the impact across the globe, the societies that have been created, out of Africa, and just understanding that piece, right, is something that one, mainstream media just doesn't get, right, when it comes to their view of Black Americans, when it comes to talent, right? And so those perceptions, right, start to get formed at an early age for individuals, right, that they're not smart, they're not, intelligent, right? They don't work as hard, just all these different things that are false. But how the media portrays it is definitely something that impacts, right, people's view on, who we are, right? And it's also understanding, I want to say this for folks who are listening, that it's one thing to be something to someone else, but then the ultimate question is, as Black people, who are we to ourselves? And that's the question that we really got to understand and answer, because that is a much deeper and richer conversation and means a lot more than who we are to other people and how they see and see us in the lens through their view. So I love it. I love it. I love it.
And a
And
quick
so
follow up, I'm sorry, quick follow up to
go
that.
for it.
But also our educational systems, the fact that, for instance, the New York Times 1619 project, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there's so much resistance to teaching that in schools. The fact that when I went to public school in New York City, the only vision I saw of myself in the school books was as a slave, right?
Mm.
And
Yep.
we didn't talk about how there were slave rebellions, right? We didn't
Mm-hmm.
talk about how Black people, like, our strength and our resistance. And so that's a part of it too, the resistance to tell our full story, in our education systems as well. So
No, I love it. Look, you still have people who don't want to admit that the Tulsa riot happened,
mm,
right? Black Wall Street's burned. You got people who still don't want to believe, and you got people today, two or three, that are still alive when it, from when it happened, right? And so it's so much, right, that we can unpack in that question. And so let me ask you this: as we continue to think about recruitment, we continue to think about talent. How do you feel the claims that Black talent can't be found? These claims coming from organization, like, how do you feel about that claim, and why do you think a lot of companies are using that, like, as a reason as to why they don't have talent within their organization?
yeah, first of all, that's total bull, because Black talent is everywhere. The problem is companies are lazy. So let's be
Mm,
real. They want to take the easy way out and do lateral hiring, meaning stealing Black talent from their competitors instead of doing the work. The work
mm-hmm,
is reassessing their hiring practices, making connections with Black professional organizations, HBCUs, and also hiring talent from related industries, thinking outside of the box a little bit, right?
yep,
In addition to that, establishing and maintaining strong D&I initiatives to keep talent, not just playing MLK's I Have a Dream speech in February and hosting an Asian themed cooking class in May, because that is, again, lazy. Also, looking ahead, so investing in pipeline programs, at least at the college level, but if you could reach back further and start impacting high school students, doing that. So we are not the problem. We are here. Clearly, we are here. It is up to companies to shift how they are doing their hiring. They're doing the same things and expecting different results.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And let me tell you something that's also interesting about that I find a very I don't say alarming, but a very interesting point is that It's amazing how companies can't find Black talent when it comes to hiring in an organization, but there seems to be no problem when it comes to selling their goods, selling their
Mm.
products, selling their services. But they find us immediately. They know how to do Black targeted marketing to make sure that we go get the shoes, the hat, the belt, the match, the cologne that make you smell good. Like there's no issue with that part of it. But there's an issue when it comes to bringing them into the organization to see the other side to work, to have them a part of that workforce. And so I always thought that was interesting. Like, you can find me if you want to, you just don't want to.
Right. Well,
Right.
I do diversity and inclusion in the marketing and advertising industry. So it's so interesting
Hmm.
that you use that example. I say that because the big thing is authenticity. That is
Hmm.
always the big word. And I could just envision these marketers in a room struggling over how to market this product to Black people. And I'm like, you know what would make this a lot easier? If you
Get some Black people.
to say, this is what I want to see in this commercial. You are literally working 5 times harder trying to tap into how we think and doing all this research trying to tap into how we think when you can literally get members of the community at the table there to say, this is how we think. This is how you should talk to us. And it does a good job because that also helps prevent getting canceled, right? Because you put out the wrong message and now you've offended people and now you got to issue all them statements and apologize. Just bring us into the room.
Yeah. Look, it seems like it would be that easy, right? It's like, look, I know the answer. I got the answer that'll save us another 150 years in doing this. Right. And so when we think about hiring, right, and we're thinking about like how do we as practitioners set up that process, right? How do we, make our hiring process more inclusive? What is the process or what are those steps as organizations are looking to get deeper in this work that they can take in order to improve their recruitment process and make it more inclusive? And just kind of thinking about that, like, how do you approach it, from a strategy perspective? And then also, if you've seen any companies at each of those stages that I would say haven't been as successful, like, what could they do in order to get back on the right track?
Yeah. So for me, it's a 4-step process that is
Okay.
accountability, doing a diversity hiring audit, goal setting, and then measuring results. So I can start with accountability. So, when you're trying to solve any D&I issue, most people start by looking at the numbers because what's measured gets done, right? That's true.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is, who is doing the measuring and who is driving these initiatives 1 to 2 or 3 years down the line? I say that because there's a lot of momentum for D&I at the beginning. Everyone's excited about change and making a difference. And then the roadblocks kick in, things get tough. D&I isn't trending anymore, right? So then people
Yep.
starts to wane. As a diverse person, as a Black woman, for me, this will never wane because this is a part of my life. But for people who aren't as directly impacted, it's easy to be like, this got hard. Let me put it down and just
Yeah.
get back to my other work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can do all the research in the world, but if there's no one accountable to seeing these initiatives through, they will fail. So the first step under accountability is establishing an executive D&I committee, right? A
Mm-hmm.
group of leaders across departments who are tasked with having these conversations, and they are the people responsible for seeing this through, right? It can't
Mm-hmm.
be this sort of vague, yeah, D&I is everyone's responsibility. It is, but there needs to be a core group of people that we can turn to and say, how come we didn't deliver on the results we set out to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we step into the diversity hiring audit. So this is pretty much an assessment of your current hiring processes. And this is where you're going to have to tap into HRIS for sure. And so the human resources information systems, and they can now give you some data. When you're looking at the data, you have to see like what patterns emerge, what teams within the company are the least diverse, where are the most critical needs? Is it in the areas of race, age, gender, sexual orientation, a combination of all, right?
Yeah.
You need to look at that data and make sense of it. And then goal setting. For any of these initiatives to be successful, you need a budget. I feel like these things seem obvious, but you'd be surprised. And not just a budget large enough, right? I don't know how big these companies are, but some of these budgets are really disrespectful. A budget large enough to support training, consultants, programming, sponsorship for external D&I programs, and possibly
Yeah.
bonuses for companies that go above and beyond, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for employees that go above and beyond. And then measuring results. So you've done all the work. Now we need to see how well we've done compared to the goals that we set, right? So, in terms of where companies fail at each part of the game, under accountability, there needs to be skin in the game. So,
Yeah.
I would say that, you should tie compensation to the committee's effectiveness. And, whether that's a bonus that people get or whether it needs to be tied to compensation, because how else do you get someone that has no real reason to care about this, right? Besides it's the
Yep.
right thing to do when it impacts your pockets. That's the universal language, right? Money, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
all talk money. And I think that that's how you do it. Next, when it comes to the diversity hiring audit, I think what needs to happen is there needs to be a really nuanced analysis of the numbers. So, one, you need to figure out like how many diverse people are applying for the roles, right? Because that's going to shed light on how effective your pipelines and your outreach are, right? Then how many people are receiving offers, because this is where like a lot of bias can come into play, because there could have been a candidate who did perfectly well in interviews and they seemed qualified, but why didn't they get an offer, right? And then you need to know how many candidates are accepting offers. Is there qualified diverse talent that's choosing not to work at the company for some reason? And that's always the one that gets like me thinking the most, where I'm like, wow, this candidate was amazing. They were charismatic. They checked all the boxes. We gave them a great offer. They said no. That means there was something that was said in one of their interviews or something they read about this company during the interview process and some article that made them say, nope, not for me. And that's really the one that I like to dig into. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
also, the thing that annoys me is all the emphasis on bringing people in the door and not keeping people there, right?
Mm.
I think companies, again, to that point that I said about being lazy, don't be lazy. Once you get people in the door, how are you retaining them? So, this needs to be like the availability of ERGs, opportunities for mentorship, sponsorship, and promotion. And companies need to take note from other organizations like LinkedIn and Twitter and pay your ERG leaders, right? Like LinkedIn,
Mm.
I believe, is paying $10,000 now. So running those events is work. And that little
Yep.
pat on the back is cute, but it's not enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So with goal setting, I would just say the biggest problem, again, is creating the large enough budget. I think
Okay.
that's the big issue. And then also knowing where the budget lives. I find that a lot of companies get confused about where D&I should sit. Some people have it sit with HR. Sometimes it's its own department. For me, I prefer for D&I to be separate from HR, but I think that's where the problem lies. And also, more generally, the company needs to promote and express the importance of having a willingness to change, right? And there's some work that needs to happen, because could you imagine that you've been working, let's say you're a recruiter and you've been recruiting one way for years, and now all of a sudden some consultant comes in and gives you some 2-hour presentation and says, this is the new way you need to recruit. Do you really think after 2 hours of conversation, these recruiters
Yeah.
got it? I'm never going to overlook a qualified, diverse candidate. Got everything. This is hard work. This is continuous learning. And I think you also need to be sympathetic to people who are really trying to open their minds and do the work, but this is just new terrain for them. And
Mm-hmm.
so there needs to be constant education. Talk to people about these different sort of biases, right? Affect,
Yeah.
heuristic, confirmation bias. Like there are literally terms for this, right? Teach them what these things are. Have examples. Have Q&A sessions about this, and conversations about reassessing your hiring tactics, so that this change can happen over time. It's not going to be overnight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. I love it. I got a lot of things I wanna touch on here. You struck a chord with me on where does D&I sit, right? Because that's always a discussion which shouldn't be a discussion at the end of the day, right? It's one of those things that where if it is that important to you as a business, it must report into the CEO, first of all. If it's that important, the same way money is important, finance reports to you, same way people, HR, everything aligns from there, right? So that when the CEO has that big pocketbook sitting up there and it's time to divvy out the money, right? You're not getting hand-me-downs, right, from HR or another organization within, the business, right? And so that's important, right? And then, also something when you think about, I want to add on to that, right? This is one of the topics that I love is that also one assessing where in your diversity recruitment audit, taking that internal look as well to make sure that you're looking at where are we starting, right? Because it's one thing to go out and do diversity recruitment and to have more inclusive hiring processes, but then all the talent still comes in at the lower level, customer service, production associates, right? But when it comes down to director, VP plus, C-suite, still not getting any visibility, no opportunities at that level. When we say it starts from the top, right? But we have no influence at the top of the organization, right? And so, still making sure that you go through that process intentionally and be intentional about this is what we're going to do and this is where we're going to start because of this reason, right? And so that you can have, that foreknowledge. When we talk about accountability, who's going to be looking at these metrics from years down the line, we have folks sitting at the table who can fight, who can go to bat for us, that can make sure that we have representation, right, at that level in the organization. Two other things that came into my mind, right, when you spoke, and we'd love to get your thoughts around this is, what do you think the approach needs to be when it comes to the actual hiring managers, right, and them assessing talent? And we talked about it like at the offer stage, what happened, what was the situation why they declined the offers, but what needs to happen as it relates to development for hiring managers so that we can get ultimately more output at the end of the day when it comes to talent, making it completely through the process and actually onboarding into the organization.
I think that hiring managers need to be deeply invested in making sure that they're bringing on diverse talent, right? There's this program or approach called the Rooney Rule, where for any
Mm,
role you have, you will see at least a certain amount of candidates that are diverse, right?
yeah.
And I think that from the beginning, that needs to be the understanding. Like, I am intentionally making sure I am creating space for a diverse candidate. That may not be the candidate we actually end up hiring, but I know that I have at least created a space, right, where
Hmm.
a diverse candidate could have been hired into this
Yeah.
role. And that has to be non-negotiable, right?
Mm,
Like, that's it.
yeah. No, I think that's awesome. And even to the Rooney Rule, that's just the start, right? That's a place where you can start,
Mm.
but that shouldn't be the ultimate goal, right? Because at the end of the day, right, we want to make sure that as hiring managers, and I had a client come to me one time, kind of quick story, and they said that, hey, my hiring managers say they want to do diversity recruitment, hire more diverse talent, right? They say they're doing it. But when you listen to them in the talent that they're looking for, you read the job descriptions, it's almost like they're trying to hire themselves, but they just want them to be black.
Mm.
And so we think about, how managers assess talent, right? How we look at how they look at talent, right? What does recruitment need to do, right? To make sure that as recruiters, you are the way in for the talent at the end of the day. They've
Right.
only spoken to you at this point. If they go through the next stage of the interview, at the end of the day, if you think that talent is great, right, then you should be the one going to bat for them, regardless if the manager says, hey, I'm the expert in this field. You should be an expert at assessing talent, right, as a recruiter. And you should be able to go in and make sure that when you start to hear things that don't sound right, when you start to hear comments, right, to where I have a gut feeling, or you start to hear things around, they went to this university and they just don't, produce good engineers, or you start to hear these things start
Yeah.
to pop up. It's the recruiter's responsibility in that process to make sure that that does not become a determining factor in that person being offered the opportunity.
Absolutely. And to your point, It is true. I think that you have a hiring manager who creates this vision of the person
Mm-hmm.
they want in that role. And they want the
Mm,
person to go to X school and they want them to have played these sports and to be interested in these things because a lot of times they're looking for, as you said, either someone who's like themselves or someone they feel like they could be best friends with. And
yeah. Yep. Yep.
just because you may not think you could be best friends with this person off their resume, who knows? You may end up being that. But does that mean that that's not the best person for their job?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's it's like we are all different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not everyone is going to go to the top 5 engineering school for a program. That doesn't mean that they're not the best person for that role, right? You have to just
Yep.
think bigger, think bigger. That's one of the key problems that we have.
Yeah. No. No. I agree. I agree. Let me ask you this. I'm curious when it comes to, and I have a thought here. I look at talent acquisition as gatekeepers,
Mm.
right? If you look at talent acquisition, the gamut of what I see, especially in the corporate space, is that a lot of the TA leaders are white women. And then when I go deeper into their teams, they're typically white women as well. That are actual recruiters on the team. And when I'm thinking about the ability for a recruiter to go out and effectively source talent from different backgrounds, and I see the makeup of the individuals on the team. And then I'm in these conversations, and the conversations are, hey, how can, we help our recruiters go out and source and get more diverse talent? Or, how can we make sure our recruiters have more courageous conversations? Or all of these different things are around recruiters. And this idea popped in my head as I was thinking through all of the clients that we work with over the years. And I thought to myself, and I said, well, rarely have I ever seen an organization to where they wanted to get to a particular percentage in representation to where their recruitment team didn't make up that number from a representation perspective.
Mm.
And when I was thinking about it, I'm like, all of these companies that are saying we want to do this, we want to do that. And I look at the recruitment team, the people who are searching, sourcing, interviewing talent. You have one, maybe two out of 75 recruiters are Black or Hispanic or Asian. And so that piece right there, I want to get your input on it, but I'm like, when I look at the gatekeepers and I look at the backgrounds where people come from and I see the questions that are being asked and can you help us do this? And I'm thinking to myself, well, how about from a TA perspective, we just turn that mirror around and say for a second, let's not worry about the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
Let's start right
That,
here.
that's the part. And, that's so true. And what that forces diverse candidates to do, I feel like people are doing this less though, is to make themselves seem more palatable to white
Mm,
audiences, to the white recruiter, particularly the white woman recruiter that they know they'll be working with. So, for instance, I have naturally curly hair. Back in the day, because I knew my recruiter was probably going to be a white woman or like a white person, I would straighten my hair. I would sort of make sure that I avoided saying certain stories from my background or certain things that may make me seem unrelatable to them because I was trying to connect with them. And that is too much. That honestly is too much. We should not have to do that. And I don't do that. I stopped doing that a long time ago. It's like I'm coming as I am and you like it or you don't. But that is the problem, right? Also, this makes me think of a story someone told me. They attended a HBCU and there was a recruiter from a large company that went to their school. This was years ago, so the salary is really low, but he said, the salary for this job is X amount. I mean, I'll say the amount, 30,000. And she said, but you can get an apartment in New York City and you could do this, you could do that. And people started, turning around like, wait, what? $30,000 apartment
yeah.
in New York City. And two things. Like one, you don't know anyone's financial background. So one, I don't want
Yep.
anyone to assume that I can't afford an apartment in New York City, but at the same time, I also don't want you to assume that because what she added was, oh, when someone said, oh, but I can't afford an apartment in New York City for $30,000, she was like, oh, your parents can help you. Don't
Hmm.
assume that my parents can help make up the difference either. And this is why you need diverse recruiters, right? Because what comes with that is a variety of cultural experiences and
Yep.
backgrounds, right? Because
Exactly.
if this recruiter came in with a buddy, right? Regardless of what race, somebody that just came from a different economic background than she did, she could have tapped her on the shoulder and been like, no, no, like that's that's not gonna work,
Yep.
and intercepted, or maybe they would have practiced what they were going to say the night before, and she could have been like, no, don't even say that, because let me tell you why. And this is why you will just always be served better when your team is diverse. There's just no way of getting
Yeah.
around, right? Because you have to be able to catch each other, right? You have to,
Hmm.
because no one's going to be a bigger expert on a community than members of that community.
There
And
you go.
so you're going to need to be able to lean on each other for expertise and background, and be able to say, all right, this is the best way we should approach this. Let's come together and think, like, what is our best approach of speaking to this audience? Like, how do we tap in? How do we best connect with them? And you're not going to
Yep.
do that without a diverse team of recruiters. That's just that.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's always something that a lot of organizations, they just don't want to grapple with, and it's one of those things. I'm like, well, you try to, it's all in good intent to say, hey, we want to do this for the organization, but we have to, we have to have this conversation with ourselves, because sometimes, right, I'm not a big proponent of a lot of training, right? I think that it comes down to more experiential type of, relationships. You can have some type of informal trainings, but how do we make sure that we take the content that we're trying to get across, the things that we're trying to get out there, and we're trying to, do put it and instill in the everyday work that those members and those teams are doing, right? And so when you have more interactions, right, with individuals from different groups, you start to get a wider lens and a better understanding and more points of reference to understand the issue, right? If you let Fox News or CNN or a network mold your perception of a particular group, then you're going to have a particular way by which you try to address or approach, or the timidness in those situations, or, I don't want this person, this woman, this Black woman, to be, aggressive when she's not aggressive. Like, all of these different things start to be debunked, right? When you start to have those conversations and more interactions, and you start to get the reference points. It's critical that we hire those people on the team, so that, we don't look at training as an aspect to just make someone more comfortable, right? To make you feel comfortable about where you are and what you're doing. But we look at it from an aspect of, how do we really change and transform, the culture, the company, by starting with ourselves as an organization and talent acquisition. And so I thought this just was something that, I see a lot of organizations grappling with, and I'm like, well, let's start with the people who go out and find talent.
Right.
Right. let's
Right.
let's start at the source, right, of the problem. And so, as we're thinking through this, right, and we're getting closer to the end here, there are leaders, practitioners, people who have experience, in diversity recruitment, diversity and inclusion in general, people who don't have a ton of experience, maybe just getting into the field. But for practitioners going down this path, if you could give them 2 to 3 actions that they could take after listening to this episode, to where they can stop the episode, don't stop it, just saying that, but they can end the episode, and start to, wrap their brains around 2 or 3 actions that they can take back tomorrow to the organization to get on the right path. What actions would you give them?
Yeah. One, using technology to promote inclusive hiring. As you talked about, a lot of hiring managers are a lot of times looking to hire themselves or their friends, right? So if you use technology to write gender neutral job descriptions, there's things like Textio and Gender Decoder that you can use, or writing more inclusive job descriptions. There's something called Tal Vista that you can use that will help. Why? Because we are humans, right? And, just to your earlier point, I wouldn't want anyone to feel particularly singled out, because we all have this learning to do. We can all learn from other communities, right? And we just need to realize we are all flawed and we have to be open-minded to changing. So technology definitely helps. This sounds basic, but we talked about this. Your recruiters have to be diverse and culturally competent. As you said, this is the first representation of your company to the candidate, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you wonder why some candidate is mysteriously not moving forward in a process, trust me, it probably has something to do with your recruiter or something that was said, early on in the process that maybe rubbed them the wrong way. And then I think it also boils down to authenticity.
Yep.
So if you want a diverse company, you have to hire people who are diverse. And the company needs to own their stance on D&I, right? They can't half step it, right? So if you are really
I
going to
like it.
be committed to diversity, it has to be at every level. You can't just have this all white male executive leadership team then saying diversity matters and I want to see diversity everywhere. Like, well, then somebody got to give up their seat, or y'all got to create more seats at the table. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be a commitment to it. And this is something that came up for me recently with work. Also, when you are creating a platform or when your company is creating partnerships with other organizations, are you doing your research into those organizations and making sure these aren't, you know, people or companies that support maybe initiatives that really don't, like, I'm thinking of maybe certain politicians that are particularly polarizing, right? Like, things
Private
along,
prisons and
like,
all these different.
exactly, exactly. And so make sure that you are authentic from top to bottom, because save all those flowery statements about Black Lives Matter and anti-Asian hate if you're not really going to back it up and be authentic about it throughout.
Awesome. There it go. There it go. There it goes. And so, look, to end this discussion, this is one of my favorite parts here. And so, I would say probably about 10 years ago, a little bit than 10 years ago, we did something in grad school that I really, really enjoyed. And, it had to deal with, helping people understand what's your legacy that you want to leave behind. And so I love asking this question because, I am big on like, what's the legacy? Because I feel that in order to have that legacy, you have to be working on it now and always, right? And you have to be intentional about that legacy. And one of the things that we did to help us through that process was creating a leadership legacy statement. And so what I would like for you to do is think about, in 25 words or less, like share with the audience, what is your leadership legacy statement? And I want you to think about it in this way to where whether I engage with you one time or whether I engage with you 10 times, I'm going to have a perception of who you are. And for you, it's about being intentional about the perception that you leave and what people say about you. So that when you're in your career later on and you looking back, I know exactly what people are going to say because I made sure that every interaction I showed up that way. And so when it comes to this leadership legacy statement, in 25 words or less, can you share with the audience what is your leadership legacy statement and what do you want people to say about you after they leave, a discussion or engagement or interaction with you?
Adrienne kept it real with me, period. But not just that, but we talked about the problems, but she really made me focus on solutions. So that's that for that. I don't know if you need me to expound on that.
No,
All right.
no, this is good. This is good. This is good. Well, look, this has been an amazing conversation. Before we go, any shout outs, any parting words, and where can people find you if they want to connect with you? They want to kind of dive deeper into your brain and how you think about some of these things?
Yeah, I would just say that corporate America is changing. If you see a problem at your company, say something, right? Say something to HR, say something to a leader. If you're nervous about doing that, singling yourself out, grab some colleagues, there's strength in numbers. And if you feel like you can't find a space at your company, go somewhere else. Like, and this is, of course, assuming that your bills are paid, you're okay, because I don't want to set anybody up for that. But, go somewhere else, because once companies see that their diverse talent is leaving, they're going to get nervous and they're going to have to start, assessing what's going on. And if you can't find a space for yourself in these companies, build your own, right? Like,
Mm,
I think that we have been trying so hard to fit into these spaces. We have been ignored or we have felt out of place at work, and it is exhausting. And I think that definitely we are going into this stage of life where Black people, diverse people are creating our own spaces and
yeah.
feeling like feeling more like ourselves, right? Even at work and just on social media. And I love where this is going, and I want us to keep it up and to grow it. In terms of where people can find me, they can find me at Adrienne L. Lucas on Instagram, or same Adrienne L. Lucas on LinkedIn.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, look, this has been another episode of the 3D Podcast. Thanks everybody for listening. Look, you've been listening to Cedric as well as Adrienne Lucas, Diversity and Inclusion Strategist for the National Association of Minority Speakers. We out.
We out.